Hey, and welcome to the Renaissance English History Podcast YouTube channel. It is Monday, May 15th, as I make this video, and it is the anniversary of the trial of Anne Boleyn. A lot of Tudor enthusiasts start to think a lot about Anne at this time of year when she was going through her arrest and her trial and her execution. Here comes my cat to say hi. Hey, actually, he just wants food. You're probably going to hear him crying in the background because he's going to want food and he's not going to get it from me. And so that's going to make him sad. And we might, yeah, bye, buddy. We might hear some Fred cries. His name is Fred. He came with our house, interestingly enough. When we bought our house, he was born in the window well outside, and the old owner didn't want to uproot him. He's 14, and she didn't want to take him to her new place, and uproot him. So we got him, which is wonderful because we then also have a friend for our other cat, Dinah, who came from Spain with us when we moved back from Spain. So she's a Spanish cat and she actually has a Spanish passport. Her and Fred had a little bit of a tricky time communicating at first because, she didn't speak English. It's a language problem. See, I say that and you're supposed to laugh because it's like dumb. Of course, she doesn't speak English. She's a cat. She speaks cat and he speaks cat. But I guess her cat has a Spanish accent to it. Anyway, they've worked it out. We actually have caught them snuggling on rare occasion. Anyway, I digress. If you are new here, welcome. I'm Heather Tesco, and I've been podcasting on Tudor England since 2009, and sometimes I ramble when I talk. This channel is where I put all of my podcast episodes from all the different shows I do, interviews with interesting people. Sometimes we go outside the Tudor sphere and talk about other periods in English history. And that's just what we do. So if that sounds interesting and you would like to see more of that in your YouTube feed, why don't you hit subscribe already? And then you'll never miss a video. Plus, it helps me grow the channel and reach more people. So thank you so much in advance. Okay, so today we are going to talk about one of the most infamous and contentious trials in English history, the trial of Anne Boleyn, second wife of Henry VIII. Anne's life was a roller coaster of intrigue, of ambition, and ultimately tragedy. From her rise as a lady in waiting to becoming the Queen of England, her story is a fascinating tale of power and downfall. But nothing has sparked more debate and speculation than her trial in 1536, followed by her execution. She was charged with adultery, incest, and treason. The trial was a spectacle that rocked the very foundations of the Tudor court. The dramatic proceedings were marked by scandalous accusations, political machinations, a verdict that still stirs controversy 500 years later, almost 500 years later. So was she a victim of political conspiracy? Were the charges against her justified? Was it just simply to justify her execution and make way for Henry's next marriage? Was she potentially guilty? These are the questions we will talk about. So, as we take this journey back in time, we will talk about the charges against her, the men accused alongside of her, the intricacies of the trial, and the modern perspectives on this event. We'll also talk about the verdict and the aftermath, which forever changed English history. So buckle up and let us go back to 1536 and examine the trial of Anne Boleyn. So it's May 1536, and Anne Boleyn kind of can sense that something's going on. We talked about it when we did the video on the downfall of Anne Boleyn last week, that she had asked Matthew Parker to take care of the spiritual upbringing of Elizabeth should something happen to her, and that was at the end of April. So she's starting to feel that something might be happening against her and some forces are moving against her. She was arrested on multiple charges. The charges were grave and shocking, causing a scandal that reverberated throughout the realm and beyond. She was accused of adultery, of incest, and high treason, each of which, of course, was a serious offense, punishable by death. The charge of adultery was brought against Anne on the grounds of her alleged affairs with 5 men. She was very busy, including her own brother. Adultery was not just a moral sin, but in the case of a queen, it was a political act because it could betray the kingdom itself. If you got pregnant when you were the queen and you gave birth to a child and you weren't sure if that child was the king's or was someone else's, that could be a whole heck of a lot of trouble for the realm, right? So adultery was different for a queen than for, an average, I don't know, alewife or something. So big deal. Her alleged lovers then were accused of conspiring with her to murder the king, adding to the weight of the treason. So she not only was, going to potentially get pregnant by one, which would totally mess up the succession, but then she's going to murder the king too. The charge of incest was perhaps the most shocking, leveled against Anne and her brother George. This was a significant blow to her reputation and tarnished the honor of the Boleyn family. The high treason charge stemmed from the acts of adultery and incest. In Tudor England, the queen's body was considered the property of the king, and any act of adultery was seen as theft from the king. Bad move. Moreover, as the queen's primary role was to produce a legitimate heir, questions of paternity could risk the stability of the monarchy, hence constituting an act of treason. These charges, whether true or contrived, were more than sufficient to lead to Anne's downfall. The shock that they caused in the Tudor court and the speed with which they were dealt attest to the urgency that Henry VIII and his advisors felt in trying to rid themselves of Anne. But they couldn't just take Anne down by herself. That would have been obvious, and it also would have left a lot of enemies and family members who were resentful. It would have left people, thinking that it wasn't fair and plotting potentially revenge. No, especially for Cromwell. The entire Boleyn family and faction had to be totally dismantled. So others got caught up in this plot, including George Boleyn, Viscount Rochford, Anne's older brother, and a prominent courtier in Henry VIII's court. He was accused of incest with Anne, a charge that was shocking as well as damaging. Like his sister, George was known for his wit, his charm, and his intelligence. He held various offices in the king's household and was often dispatched on diplomatic missions due to his linguistic skills and persuasive personality. We see George portrayed in shows like in The Tudors as this kind of really jerk, terrible person. Um, there's been a lot of books and a lot of historiography recently that's trying to kind of rehabilitate his reputation. Um, and a lot of that, when you think about it, came from these charges against him and some of the comments that were made at the time in his trial and around his trial. So it's not really fair to judge his entire personality based on the charges against him and based on the trial. There's a lot of evidence to show that he was actually very intelligent, very charming, a fairly decent human being, for as decent as you can be in the Tudor court in the 16th century, right? So the charge of incest, though, was a death sentence, and George was executed 2 days before Anne. Then we have Sir Henry Norris. He was the groom of the stool to Henry VIII. This was a position that made him the monarch's most intimate personal attendant. He was a close friend of the king's, and the accusations against him were particularly shocking to the court. He was accused of adultery with the queen, a charge that he vehemently denied. Despite his loyalty to the king and his previous good standing, he was also condemned to death. Also, Sir Francis Weston, a young courtier who had recently been knighted. He was accused of adultery with Anne. He was the son of Sir Richard Weston, who was a prominent courtier and diplomat. Despite his youth, he had managed to earn several positions at court, including that of the gentleman of the Privy Chamber, and he was executed the same day as Norris and George Boleyn. William Brereton was the groom of the King's Privy Chamber. This was a powerful position. He was also a very powerful political figure in Cheshire. His influence and his land ownership made him a significant figure in the North, and he was the final man executed for allegedly committing adultery with the Queen. We also have Mark Smeaton. He was a musician. He was a favorite entertainer at court. He was the only one of the accused who confessed to having an adulterous relationship with the queen, albeit this was probably under duress. There's talk that he was potentially racked, maybe tortured, to get that confession, but he did make that confession. Unlike the others, he was of low birth, and his conviction seemed like it was potentially a commentary, a grim warning about the perils of social climbing, which is interesting when you think that it came from Thomas Cromwell, who was himself a social climber in a grand scale. So I don't know what exactly that message was coming from Thomas Cromwell, but it's interesting to note that, Smeaton was of lower birth and he got caught up in this. So these men were all part of the inner circle at court, which made the charges against them even more sensational and damaging. And the groom of the stool, right? Like the closest relationship. That's the person who, works with the king in the bathroom, cleans out his chamber pot, knows like everything about the king. So the fact that the idea that he could commit adultery with the queen, really not a good scene. So their trials, their executions were swift, and there was an urgency to the matter. And they were convicted on scant evidence, and most historians believe that they were innocent, and their convictions were a result of court intrigues and the king's desperation to be free of his marriage to Anne. Also, potentially the entire plot that Cromwell kind of had built around getting rid of Anne and completely dismantling that in anybody who was an ally of hers. So the trial of Anne took place on May 15th, 1536, in the King's Hall in the Tower of London, a setting that was both grand and intimidating. It was packed with spectators, including members of the King's Council, peers of the realm, and other notables who were all very eager to witness the event. This was not a private affair. It was designed to be public, to convey the gravity of the charges against Anne and the king's determination to see justice served. The jury consisted of 26 peers, including Anne's own uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, who presided over the proceedings. These are men of high rank. Many had personal or political reasons to find Anne guilty. There was no jury of her peers in the modern sense. There were no women. There was nobody from the Boleyn family apart from her uncle. There was no one who could be expected to show her any sympathy or any kind of understanding. Anne was charged, like I said, with adultery, incest, and plotting the king's death. Extremely serious charges punishable by death. The prosecution presented a detailed timeline of alleged illicit encounters between Anne and the accused men. And it's interesting to note that the men had already been found guilty before Anne's trial. So, it's hard to commit adultery with the queen if the queen is then found innocent. So going into it, she already knew she was going to be found guilty because they had been found guilty, and you can't have an adulterous relationship without the adulterous party. So the evidence was largely circumstantial, based on reports of conversations, reported sightings, confessions obtained under duress. The key piece was that confession of Mark Smeaton, the musician, like I said, who had been potentially racked before he confessed. Anne now defended herself eloquently and assertively. She denied all the charges. She argued that she had never been alone with the accused men. She had always conducted herself appropriately. She pointed out inconsistencies in the prosecution's timeline, and she highlighted the lack of hard evidence. However, of course, her efforts were in vain. The outcome of the trial was already predetermined. The jury was not there to ascertain the truth, but to validate the king's decision to rid himself of Anne. So they only deliberated for a very short time, and they found Anne guilty. The Duke of Norfolk was apparently kind of teary-eyed when he pronounced the sentence. Anne would be either burned or beheaded at the king's pleasure. It was a shocking moment that highlighted the ruthlessness of the king and the fragility of power and fortune in the Tudor court. I would not have wanted to live in the Tudor court because even if you were successful one day, the next day, who knows? You could fall just as easily as you could rise. The trial of Anne was more of a public spectacle than a quest for justice. The charges were serious, but the evidence was flimsy and largely circumstantial. It was a legal proceeding with a predetermined outcome, orchestrated to provide a veneer of legitimacy to the king's decision to dispose of his unwanted wife. I hear you, buddy. You really want some food. Let me finish up, okay? He really wants food. Anyway, despite the unfairness of her trial and the brutality of her sentence, Anne met her end with courage and dignity, further cementing her place in history as one of the most famous queens of England. So now let's talk about how modern scholars view the trial and execution of Anne Boleyn. Modern scholars largely agree that the charges against Anne were fabricated. There's a consensus that the evidence was weak, the confessions were obtained under duress. It's also widely recognized that the timeline of her supposed adulterous liaisons is riddled with inconsistencies. For example, some of the adulterous encounters took place when she was known to be elsewhere, or when she was heavily pregnant, or after she had just given birth. So that's probably not going to happen. She is often portrayed as a victim of a ruthless king and his advisors. Some argue that she was a scapegoat caught up in the political machinations of the Tudor court. While she was undoubtedly ambitious and sharp tongued, these traits do not make her guilty of the crimes that she was accused of. And recent scholars paint a picture more of a woman who was intelligent, who was politically astute, and ahead of her time. Modern historians have probed the motivations behind the charges. Some attribute it to Henry VIII's desperate desire for a male heir and his infatuation with Jane Seymour. Others point to Thomas Cromwell, who saw Anne as a threat to his power. There's also the theory that Anne's reformist ideas, which were becoming increasingly influential, alarmed more conservative elements at court. So basically, she had a lot of enemies. Um, and not a huge support system like Catherine of Aragon had had with having a nephew who was the emperor. So there wasn't a lot that could keep Anne, that could support Anne when she lost favor with the king. Most of her power was in having favor with the king, and when that fell, there wasn't a lot left. The legal proceedings against Anne are today seen as a travesty of justice. There was no presumption of innocence. Anne had no legal counsel. The jury was biased, and the verdict was predetermined. The use of torture to extract confessions, a common practice at the time, is of course now considered a gross violation of human rights. Her trial and execution have had a lasting impact. They marked a turning point in Henry VIII's reign. It led to his relationship with Anne, led to the break with Rome and the start of the Church of England. Also serves as a reminder of the dangers faced by women in power in a male dominated society. She's also become, in some ways, a feminist icon, even though I really dislike putting that label on her. Sometime I'm going to do a video of why I don't like putting modern labels on people for whom it would have had no meaning. But that's not this video. Let's just say that she is definitely the symbol of a woman who dared to break norms, and she paid the ultimate price for it. Looking at the trial of Anne from a modern perspective, it's clear that it was a deeply flawed process. It was predetermined. And today, Anne is seen not as a perpetrator, but as a victim of a brutal political system. Anne's reaction to her sentence was one of calm acceptance. In her final speech, she said, "I do not say that I have always borne towards the king the humility which I owed him, considering his kindness and great honor that he showed me and the great respect he always paid me. I admit, too, that often I have taken it into my head to be jealous of him, but may God be my witness if I have done him any other wrong." The sentence was carried out quickly on May 19th, just 3 days after her trial. She was executed by a French swordsman who was an expert in swift and merciful execution. Her brother George and the other men had been executed 2 days earlier. Her final moments were spent praying, and she maintained her innocence all the way until the end. The aftermath of the trial was swift and brutal. Henry VIII was free to marry Jane Seymour, which he did just 11 days later. The Boleyn family fell from grace. Their influence at court diminished significantly. The shock and the scandal of Anne's downfall and execution would echo through the Tudor court for years to come. Interestingly, of course, it was Anne's daughter Elizabeth who would go on to become one of England's greatest monarchs. Despite the scandal that surrounded her mother's life and death, Elizabeth managed to navigate the treacherous waters of the Tudor court and ascend to the throne. Her reign, known as the Elizabethan era, was one of England's most prosperous and influential periods. So, the dramatic events of May 1536 forever changed the landscape of the Tudor court, and their reverberations can still be felt today. As we finish up this video, we're left with more questions than answers, of course. Was Anne guilty of the charges against her? Was she a victim of her own ambition, or was she a victim of Cromwell and the sort of politics involved? The debate continues to rage 500 years later. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about Anne's trial? What do you think about what was going on with Cromwell, with Henry, with Jane Seymour? How do you think Jane Seymour felt watching all of this take place? Yikes, right? That's all I can say, just yikes. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. So thank you so much for watching. If you got to the end of this video with me, you're still here, why not hit that like button and subscribe? That way you won't miss out on any future videos that I put out. Leave a comment. Let me know what you thought about Anne's trial. And I will talk with you again very, very soon. Thank you so much for watching. See you soon. Bye. Okay, Fred, I'm going to feed you now. Have a great day, everybody.